No.
What does WTP stand?
Willingness to pay. And again, focus just on the thin wall at first, and then once we get the hang of that, then we'll do the PET about 15 minutes after that. But in terms of thin wall, all right?
Fully welcome.
Asking me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can do like basic spreadsheet stuff on here. Just when if it gets complex.
In a
I'm not
sense,
sure.
this is just arithmetic for the moment, right? The arithmetic is going to get into the power of a spreadsheet when we start to ask questions about sensitivities. But we have to start with arithmetic before we deal with sensitivities. And, you know, and then, by the way, as we do this, right, think about discount rate, right? If you can't handle discount rate, fine, just stick with the machines as it is right here. But if you can handle discount rate, think about, okay, how much is going to save me in year one, how much is going to save me in year two, keeping in mind the year two money isn't worth as much as year one money.
What's a cycle? A day, an hour?
Cycle is every time you push the machine, that's a cycle, right?
So 6 seconds a cycle for Husky?
Mm-hmm. Just to give you a small hint, one number I did not put on your fact information is the number of seconds in an hour, the number of seconds in a minute, not the number of minutes in an hour. So I thought you might know it already, but you do need to know that in order to complete this analysis.
So it's good to be here.
It is always good to know. Which, by the way, you know, when I say there's only 20 hours in a day, I mean, that's already saying this is not purely the crossword can be found, you know, in the physics of the world. Okay, so the first question should be, let's put it this way, who has the answer to the first question? Okay, what do you have?
Well,
Number?
Husky, I have 1,168,000.
No. How about 9,600?
Nope. How many containers per year?
8. No, I don't.
Okay, nope. Nope, nope, nope.
What were you
Okay.
saying about the first question?
What's the answer to it? Right? So let's just go over it from an arithmetic standpoint.
I've got 84,096,000.
84,096,000. Not quite, but pretty close, and then that may just be a, no, not quite. So let's just to walk through the math on this side of things. One of the things that always helps on these kinds of analyses is to really focus on units, right? So we have both numbers and units at the same time. So here we have numbers and here we have units. And the way that you keep things in terms of your answer is you really want to focus on matching the units and letting the units cancel each other out. So we want a calculation of containers per year, right? And let's look at all the things that sort of cancel each other out. So we have 20 hours per day and 365 days per year. The days and days cancel each other out. And we have 60 seconds a minute and 60 minutes per second. Excuse me, 60 seconds a minute, 60 minutes per hour, right? Which means this really would be 60 seconds times 60 per hour, which would really be 3,600 seconds per hour, right? And we have 20 hours times hours here. So again, just crossing off a numerator with a denominator. And we now have 20 times 365 times 60 times 60 times 16. The units we're still left with is divided by year, times seconds, times container divided by cycle, and then we also have seconds per cycle. This one isn't. So let's get this, make sure we get this right. So in other words, the numbers we can do, but it's harder to do without paying attention to the units. Right? So just perhaps a way to set it up on your spreadsheet is to have just 3 columns, right? Here is the number, and here is the numerator and the denominator. So this is the x per x, right? X per y. So you might have something like 60 seconds per minute, right? And 60 minutes per hour. And now you can see the word minute appears in both columns. And you ultimately want to get to a point where you have something where it's containers per year. So whatever you want to have containers only appear once on this side and year only appears once on this side. So 60 seconds per hour, we have 20 hours per day. And what I'm really doing here is I'm about to set these up in the sequence that every time I add a unit, I'm canceling out the other unit. So, let's do it the other way. Let's do it just in the other direction. Right, so per year, what do we know about something that happens per year?
365 days.
Good. So we have days per year. Okay? And we want to be able to cancel out days. So how many things, what do we have as a unit per day?
20 hours.
20 hours per day. Perfect. Right? And then we now need to be able to cancel
60.
hour.
3,600.
Right? So we can have, if you want to just skip, we'll do seconds per hour. 36 seconds per hour. Right? And now we're left with something per second. Yeah, no, you're exactly right. 6 seconds, yeah. So it's going to be cycles per second. Right? But here it's actually seconds per cycle. So you have to put 1/6. Right? Because it's going to be an inverse. Because you have seconds per cycle, you want seconds per second. So it's either 1/6 per 1/6 cycle per second, or 6 seconds per cycle. Right? And this is where you're going to put in one version for Husky and another version for Contender. Right? And so now we're still with cycle.
Now you need just 16 containers per cycle.
Right? So containers per cycle, which is now 16. So 16 containers. So now we have containers in the year. So we have the year from the top, containers from the bottom. We just have to multiply each of these together. When we do that, we get the number you need over here.
How's that utilizing Excel?
So far, it's just Word. Although Excel is very convenient. So it's just good just to kind of we're losing the figures, right? Okay. So what do we have right now? So what is
17,800,000.
good? So for
80,000.
So for Husky, final answer
70,080,000.
70.1 million. Good. And for the competitor,
60 million.
60.1 million.
60.
Right. And from the spreadsheet standpoint, now you say, what do you need Excel for? If you have set this all up right, A times B, or A1 times A2 times A3 times A4 times A5, the A is the vertical thing. The only thing you change is this thing right here, and then you're going to get this, the same answer out of here, just shifted one to the other, right? That's just if you want to be a little bit cheeky about using Excel. But the point is, we only got this by setting up our units to match across columns. All right, so question number 1 is already answered. How many containers a year does a Husky make versus competitor? Okay. Now, what's the difference in capital cost? Right. Right. So this is, in a sense, it's saying how many of the competitor system you have to buy
What did you get the competitive one to be, sorry?
60,
Yeah.
60-ish, 60.1, and the other 7 with rounding.
Oh, fine.
So if you were making, right, if you were, let's say we're making 1,000, sorry, it's 60 million per year, 1 billion containers a year, right? How many of one machine would you have to buy compared to how many of the other kind of machine?
Say that again?
Right? If you're making 1 billion containers a year, how many Husky machines would you need? It would be 1 billion divided by 7, right? Because however many you need to make, it's that number divided by 70, that's how many Husky machines you need. Now, let's say you bought a competitor machine instead. How many would you need to buy? 1 billion divided by 60. So in a sense, that billion doesn't matter. We know that we would have to buy, in order to make however many machines, you need to buy more competitor machines than Husky machines to accomplish the same thing, merely because the Husky machines are more efficient on the capital side. So what's that ratio?
The Husky 70 over 60.
Yep. And what's that number?
160.
Yeah, one and a 60. Okay, good. Now, what's the capital cost?
But that, I mean, you didn't have to do a whole calculation because everything else is the same. It's just the difference between
That's true.
7 and 6.
Yep, that's true.
Can you
That's
please
true.
go over this real quick?
Which part?
Question 2.
Yes, you don't need, you're exactly right, only because everything cancels out. But you're right, you could just do the 7 and the 6. But they're just, this is not questions where you need to answer question 2 to get question 1, but help to keep you simple. You said to answer, go over again. Which part?
Just question 2.
Question 2, what's the difference in capital costs, right? So, using this reasoning instead of this reasoning, because you're right, this does shortcut this, right? Let's say you wanted to build exactly 420 million containers. How many Husky machines would you need? Right? If each Husky machine can make 70, you would need to buy 6 of them, right? And how many competitors? If each competitor made 60, you'd have to buy 7. Right? So in a sense, you have to buy 7.6 or 1.166, right? Machines to cover the cost of one Husky machine. Okay? But how much does the competitor machine cost?
Oh.
It's on the previous. It's just
Yeah,
there's no calculation.
350K.
350K. And how much does a Husky machine cost?
400.
400K. So which one is better from a capital standpoint?
The competitor.
The competitor.
The competitor gets 350, but wait, how many of those competitor machines do you have to buy?
Right, so you're right. So
Which is
that
how
has
much?
to be 1.16.
1.16 times
400 over 350.
times just 350, right? Should equal 1 times 400, right? Not equal. Which one is more efficient? Which one is a better price? Buying one 400,000 machine or 1.16 $350,000 machine? Right? So this machine, which is not as efficient as a Husky machine, costs less. But is it less to the degree that says, you know what, it's worth paying less because, you know, it gets less? Or we say, you know what, you spend less, you get what you pay for, as my mother-in-law
The
says.
equivalent cost is 4.8.
Right? How much? 408,000. She doesn't actually sound like that, but it's nice. Right. So now, if you're the Husky sales guy, you walk in and say, "Hey, our machines cost 400, the other guys cost 350, but you need to buy more of those machines." Right? You know, you're gonna have to buy to the point where those machines are so inefficient. Ours at 400 is actually cheaper than that 408 that the competitor needs. Right? So now, if you're now on the Husky pricing team, you say, hey, how are we going to keep this up? Should we price our machine at 370? Should we price our machine at 390? Should we price our machine at 450? No. What have they figured out? Pricing at 400 because that beats the efficiency of the other machine. Now, that's just for straight up capital costs. There's still also the difference in material costs.
Resin.
Right? The resin. So what do we know? What's the annual savings in terms of resin from a Husky machine? Right? How many grams per container are you saving with a Husky machine?
2.
2? And how much does it cost per
But this
gram?
is per container. This is
Well, we
per.
need to convert.
It's 2 grams per container.
We need to convert gram into kilos.
What do I write there?
This is grams. Difference is 2, but this is per container.
Yeah, it's per container. It's in the case. I mean, I just didn't.
Per kilo. That's
Right.
1,000 grams.
Do you guys know what a kilo is?
1,000 grams.
Yes, and how much does resin cost?
70 cents.
Right?
Per
Seven
kilo.
cents,
kilo.
right? So how much, what's your annual resin savings? For somebody who's making
7 million. No calculators.
Well, it's 2 less. For 10 million, let's say.
Mhm.
So 2 grams less per 10 million times 70 cents.
Just how much?
Okay, 2 grams times 10 million.
You have the spreadsheet in front of you, which is we can put in the numbers. Right, so far we have a 400,000 Husky machine versus a 408,000 competitor. Yeah, you know it says 350, but it's going to cost you more because you're forgetting the fact that it's
14
machines.
14 million.
Right? Not quite. Per machine. So instead for a Husky machine, right, for 70 million containers a year, times 2 grams per container times 7 cents per, is that right? 70 cents per kilo is $98,000 a year.
How did you get to that?
78.1 times 2 times
Yeah, I got that.
7, you got that?
98 million.
98,000.
Oh, because I'm gonna have to divide by.
So, no, say that again.
Divide by
70?
Now you want to walk us through that?
70 times 2?
Yes, sure. So I have to figure out what my, okay, so however many Husky containers there are per year, so the 70 million number
Good.
times 2 times 70 cents divided by 1,000,
Is 98,000
112.
per year. Per year. So here you are saying, hey, it's $400,000 in capital costs plus another, I'm going to round to be convenient, $100,000 a year. Now, is that $100,000 a year indefinitely? No, because we just talked about discounted cash flow. So it's not actually $100,000 a year, it's $100,000 maybe the first year, and depending how much you discount your savings, the second year that $100,000 is worth as much. So you could make it the 100 the first year and whatever else the second year, but for sure we're already at the level of at least $500,000, right? Just in year 1 alone. So we have the the capital cost savings of $8,000, and then the materials cost of at least $100,000. Okay. So is Husky charging appropriately for their product?
Define appropriately.
Compared to the amount of savings that the customer is making. So the customer should be willing to pay more. Why should the customer be willing to pay more?
You're saving.
Because they're saving, over $100,000 a year, plus $8,000 just in the equipment. Right? Now, what are the sensitivities? What are the assumptions that I put in here that will make any individual customer look at this and say, yeah, but that's not true for me?
Well, there's
I was behind. Well, how many grams are a kilo? I'm just trying to figure this out.
1,000 grams per kilo. So 1,000 grams per kilo times 70 cents per unit times 2 grams saved. Right, that's the grams of resin more efficiently. So 2 is 14 minus
Well, I
12.
will get it right at the end.
No, it's 14 minus 12. You can do 1 times 14 and 1 times 12, which do times 2, because 2 is the difference. Times 70 million per year will be calculated. Yeah.
I was gonna say, I think it depends, like, the cost savings will depend on how much they're charging for the product, I guess, wouldn't it?
No.
Because wouldn't that number be insignificant, perhaps, the 98,000?
So all right. So if you're a bottler and you buy you buy a machine, right? You're saying, what's doing $100,000 savings, whatever. If I'm just going to pass it on to Coca-Cola, who's going to pass it on to the wholesaler, pass it on to the end customer, for sure.
Yeah.
But remember, this is value chain, right?
Right.
Every step is just between me and the guy I bought it from, right? How do I maximize that? So Husky is providing value for their customer by giving them a better quality machine. Why doesn't Husky charge even more? And by the way, what are the assumptions what are the sensitivities of that? We looked at the average customer. What might a customer look at this and say, yeah, but that's not true for me? What are the kinds of things that a customer might say? I don't need exactly 1.37 machines. I can't buy 1.37 machines. Or I don't run 20 hours a day, I only run 18 hours a day.
I don't have
Or I don't have room. Or, and by the way, we'll cover the room issue because these machines are the same, but the PET machines that we'll cover in a moment, the Husky machines are actually smaller. Right? But you're right, if you need an odd number of machines, or you have what's called grid effect, right? Maybe a linear function, but if it's a stepwise function in terms of cost, You know, if it doesn't work out for what your costs are, it's not. So the answer is, you know, you can't quite cut it perfectly to spend exactly $1 less because it really depends what each customer needs. And a customer that makes 70.1 million margarine containers is not going to buy another whole machine just to make one more container because they're full, right? Because they'll run a production cycle. Point is, we've now calculated how much a customer should be willing to pay for a Husky machine because we figured out how much value the Husky machine creates relative to a competitor. And here are different discount rate assumptions of how much money would be saved, right? So again, if you say infinite discount rate, which is the line at the bottom, you're going to say, you know what, I don't really care about the annual savings. I just know that I'm going to save at least on that first year, and I'm going to save on the cost of the machine, as opposed to how much do I value my cash every year. That 10% discount says, wow, you know, Husky's really saving me a ton of money. Let's do the same calculation for a PET machine. Actually, I'll leave this as an exercise you can work on. I don't have a ton of time, but but it's the same logic. It's the same logic. Here, where first of all you want to set up your units right here, right, to get ultimately to the questions that are on the page that follows, like how many preforms a day does Husky produce as opposed to a competitor, right? So you can do preforms per day, dollars per kilo, space constraints, cost savings on the fixed cost side, cost savings on the revenue side. I want to cut this off because I want to get into a little bit different model structure with looking at the willingness to pay for a Cree light bulb. Capacity limitation, types of customers. By the way, this model does show what are the types of customers would buy a Husky system, just based on what you've seen here.
Someone with a bit of his volume?
Yeah, you need volume, for sure. Right? If you're not going to have volume, you know, that's not the type of, you know, this is not the kind of machine. Okay, so what's happening in 1996? We have some demand dropping, we have consolidation, we
Issues
don't,
with the supply?
yeah, restriction of supply, and they don't have enough barriers to entry because Natstall is not going to copy in. And so what could Husky do? We're going to skip ahead of this because I want to go to Cree. And if we have time, we're going to come back to this. So let's talk about Cree for a little while. And when I say let's talk about Cree, I only want to talk about the part of Cree which has to do with willingness to pay. And this is going to be a little bit easier because we're going to think about willingness to pay from the standpoint of us as personal consumers. But before I do that, I want to talk on more general terms about economies of scale. Right? What does that really mean? And this is going to be particularly relevant to what you were talking about before about I've got this great product and how come no one's buying it? Maybe they will, I don't know. And the notion was called disruptive technology and the innovator's dilemma. So disruptive technology is some technology that does it better than the current way of doing things, but better by leaps and bounds. Not better by being like, hey, this is, you know, the iPhone 5, what are we going to think of next? The iPhone 6? Like, that's an incremental change, right? Say again? Perhaps, right? We're talking about a completely different way of doing things in a way that totally changes the industry itself. So for example, you can get more and more efficient about making an incandescent light bulb. It doesn't matter. Somebody comes up with a completely new technology called LED, right? That's going to completely change the cost structure. That's what I mean by disruptive technology. But first let's talk about economies of scale, right? This is what we typically talk of, speak of when we talk about economies of scale, right? You make only one of something, it's going to cost you a lot. Right, average cost per unit. You make enough of it, right? You eventually get economies of scale. You can have this like, you know, you can spend $100,000 on a machine, but if you make $1 million of a product, that $100,000 becomes really divided by your billion widgets that you're making, right? And it's just the individual cost of each item that eventually bottoms out. And over here, the curve, by the way,
Spreads over
comes
the fixed cost.
exactly. The fixed cost just spread over time. And in the economies of scale literature, there's talk about what's called diseconomies of scale, which is to say at some point you become so big that you become bureaucratic and bloated and unable to serve. This can be done at the level of the individual company. It can be done at the level of the industry. But the point is, you know, this is where you are. And so you have a line here that represents this is what sort of the end state cost will be, and this is what the end state quantity that's going to be manufactured by any individual company. And so let's say you're GE, right? You're GE. You're going to make light bulbs at this cost, and here is the you know, the amount that you're going to get. Now, that assumes a certain level of demand exists, right? Because now suppose there's a new technology that exists, right? And that new technology has lower cost to manufacture. The problem is, we're actually stuck over here. Why? Because there's not enough demand for that product. This is the core problem of what goes on for light bulbs. Right? So you've got a technology that should be cheaper than the incumbent technology, but the incumbent technology actually costs less because they're already producing and fulfilling the market need. So now you have new people coming saying, hey, I've got a cheaper way to make a light bulb, but it's not really cheaper unless enough of you buy it. And you're not going to buy it because it's not cheap, and it's not cheap because not enough people are buying it, and then they become stuck. It is a vicious cycle. So you have here a superior technology where demand got cannibalized by old inferior technology, and they're stuck, and eventually they lose out. And this is why new technologies that are promising sometimes fail because there's not enough of a market for them. Why is there not enough of a market for them? Not because there's not enough market that would buy, but because the market's already taken up by the existing product.
So you have to
And
stop
because there
taking
isn't
the
much of a
product.
difference.
Right.
Not everybody cares
So you
about,
have to
like,
stop
energy
using-
savings.
Yes. And yes, so you have to stop using.
Also lack of
So you have to-
education,
I'll
marketing.
come back to this.
So you have to stop using the old one, get to know the new one, but why would you get the new one? You're still using the old one.
So here you go, you're a consumer. Yeah, you got to stop using the old one and start using the new one. Guess what? The new one still costs too much.
So why would
So
you-
why would you ever
But
do that?
not
Why
only
would you
it-
ever switch to the new technology if it's more expensive?
But not only it costs too much, it also offers, like, it's not, like they said, like, they had problems with it was too dim. So you're getting something that's
But that's a quality issue. But now it's
Yeah.
does, it just can't catch up with the cost. Now, it does eventually catch up with the cost under the right circumstances. We'll talk about that. But absent those kinds of circumstances, you're stuck in a situation where unless somebody's willing to pay more for it, that's it. Even though you've got a superior product with a cost curve that's going to be better, unless you can develop critical mass, you're never going to be able to cost out the inferior technology. Okay, so how can a technology gain sufficient scale? A couple of ways. First of all, subsidization, right? You might be willing to lose money on it enough so you get enough scale, and finally you get scale, you can make it, right?
Which is a very popular method.
And in fact, from a public policy standpoint, it's not a bad idea, and that's why that countries, including this one, have passed laws against incandescent light bulbs, because in the grand scheme of things, right? They recognize that we're never going to lower this collectively on a social level unless there's some mechanism to lower that cost low enough that we can achieve the volume, and that volume can then be in turn replaced by the economy of scale. That gets
Some
calculated.
artificial method.
Artificial.
Does it depend on the per unit cost?
Yeah.
Take something so replaceable and consumable, like a light bulb or something.
It could be anything.
Plastic bags.
Yeah, really any type of technology. But yeah, I mean, in terms of when there is an incumbent technology that's so low cost, it does not matter how much an even better technology could be to replace it.
Here they charge an extra 10 cents for a plastic
That's
bag.
the only way they could do it.
In Australia they ban them.
Yeah, that's the only way they could do it, right? And by the way, so subsidization will work, but that presumes that cost curve is real. Because right now, I can draw a cost curve on the board, but in fact, all we know is that this is what the cost is, and we say we promise it's going to cost less once we're allowed to make this many. But how do you actually know until you start making it? Turns out maybe it doesn't cost that much less. So part of it is you got to believe the hype, right? The other way that technologies make it in is that they end up selling to ancillary markets. So you say, I've got this fabulous product, right? That my core market isn't buying it because I'm not cheap enough for them, but maybe there's someone else who's going to buy my product, and I can sell it to them for a long enough period of time that I can use it to finally figure out what I'm doing and get my cost low enough, then eventually get to the mass market, right? So an ancillary market could be a niche, it could be, it may not always be possible, by the way, but when it works beautifully. And this is how new technology change. Now let's talk about this from the user perspective. Right? This is classical learning curve, right? But it's also beyond the notion of classical learning curve. How does a user shift from one type of technology to another? Think about yourself. At some point, you probably didn't have a cell phone at all, and then at some point you decided, I'm going to have a dumb phone, and at some point you decided to have a smartphone, right? How did you decide to switch from one to the other? Well, part of it is you may have been an early adopter, part of it is you may have been, had different performance criteria, but inevitably what happens is you have some sort of technology that emerges, right? And the performance of that technology gets better and better, which is fine, and then it's, and then it works. Okay, everyone has one, you have one, okay, that's nice. I have a phone, you have a phone, that's nice. Okay. Now some sort of new technology comes out, technology number 2, and it's not as good as what you already have. So here you are, the first iPhone I got was the iPhone 4. In fact, I saw the iPhone 4, right? But think of who got the iPhone 1. Anybody here who got the iPhone 1 when it came out?
My brother did.
Right. So there are going to be some people who are going to be these early adopters, right? But chances are, if they got the iPhone 1, they're willing to say, I'm okay getting a product that's not as good as my very reliable phone,
The StarTech.
because my StarTAC, because, you know, at least